Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, March 14th. Today is the 160th day since the October 7th attacks in southern Israel. The U.S. would be willing to support a limited Israeli offensive in Rafah in South Gaza. That was communicated today, focused on eliminating the leadership of Hamas as long as Israel doesn't launch a full-scale invasion. That was reported in Politico, according to senior Biden officials. And that was communicated to their Israeli counterparts. The White House said that the U.S. does not want to see Israeli operations in Rafah unless there is credible, legitimate, and an executable plan to provide for the safety and security of civilians there. You will recall that the vast majority of the population that was displaced from the north is now living in Rafah. CENTCOM said that they conducted a combined humanitarian aid airdrop together with the Royal Jordanian Air Force into North Gaza. We did learn today that the solar panels of the Aliyah Hospital, which is a ministry of the Anglican Diocese of Jerusalem, were destroyed by a humanitarian airdrop. A second ship with food aid to Gaza was loaded in Cyprus, a charity arranging the mission said today as well. Representatives from prominent clans in Gaza informed international organizations and Israel that their cooperation in distributing aid would only be allowed through current Hamas channels. The health ministry in Gaza said that today the death toll in Gaza is 31,341 Palestinians killed. Those wounded is now 73,134 since October 7th. In the U.S., the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, he's the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in U.S. history. He is a stalwart defender of Israel, and he called on Israel to hold new elections. He said that the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, had lost his way and bowed to the demands of extremists, and that his government is no longer fit the needs of Israel after October 7th. Schumer warned that Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah, and that it will test the U.S. standards for assistance. The U.S. issued its second round of sanctions on Israeli settlers, including the first ever sanctions on entire outposts in the West Bank. Dozens of pro-Palestinian demonstrators blocked the New York Times newsroom, accusing its staff of complicity in genocide. And in Israel, a man in his 50s was critically wounded in a stabbing attack in the Beit Kama Junction in southern Israel. Police said that the assailant was a 22-year-old citizen of Israel, originally from Gaza. He was shot by a soldier at the scene. Prime Minister Netanyahu met at the Defense Ministry headquarters in Tel Aviv with relatives of hostages that are believed to still be held by Hamas in Gaza. At least 40 relatives were present, or at least 40 relatives earlier today. 40 relatives of those held hostage blocked a highway, the Alan Highway in Tel Aviv, protesting. I've heard that part of what's happening is they're just trying to find out more news. They're desperate to have, the hostages returned home. They feel like their government's not doing enough. So one of the reasons they've been blocking aid is as much, I was speaking to a friend in Israel today who was saying it's as much for them to get news and to put pressure on their own government as it is for them to block aid from people in Gaza as well. In the West Bank, Hamas called on the Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem, as well as Arab citizens of Israel, to be alert and ready to defend the Al-Aqsa Mosque on Friday, which begins the formal month of Ramadan, remain there and to be prepared to remain there for days and nights. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas intends to appoint Mohammed Mustafa as the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. Mustafa currently manages the financial apparatus of the PA. It's believed, if appointed, he will aim for a technocratic government that will include representatives from prominent Gazan families. Hostilities have continued between Hezbollah and Israel at the north border of Israel and the southern border of Lebanon. And the UN released an investigation saying that an Israeli tank killed a Reuters journalist in Lebanon last year when it fired at a group of clearly identifiable journalists. In the Gaza Strip, these are just some reports from OSHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They reported that there continues to be intense bombardment from air, land, and sea, reported across much of the Gaza Strip. This results in further civilian casualties, displacement, destruction of civilian infrastructure. Israeli airstrikes continue in the heavily populated Rafah, which is in South Gaza. There are still reports of airstrikes near Doctors Without Borders supported maternal field hospital. The World Health Organization and UNICEF raised concerns about child malnutrition levels. There are now at least 15 children reported to have died from malnutrition and dehydration at the Kamal Hospital in North Gaza, with additionally 6 acutely malnourished children at the risk of death. UNICEF stated that the malnutrition rates for children under 5 in North Gaza where access to aid has been limited, are 3 times higher than those in the south. In terms of trucks being allowed into Gaza, they're averaging about 127 trucks a day. That's well below the goal of 500 trucks a day. February, the average number of trucks per day was only 900 trucks per day in the month of February. Hostage negotiations have continued to stall, according to Qatar, who is at the center of those negotiations. It seems that the possibilities of a 6-week temporary ceasefire are off the table. This past week, there was the goal proposed by the U.S. Of a possibility of a short pause of 2 to 4 days, according to an Egyptian source. No news in that regard. Opponents of a comprehensive ceasefire say that this would essentially be allowing Hamas to win, that a comprehensive ceasefire what would prevent Sinwar, the military head of Hamas, and Hamas from attacking again in the future? That, and I think it's important to understand a comprehensive ceasefire would have negotiations that would demand that, Hamas demilitarize, that would demand that Hamas would no longer be, certainly not the governing body within Gaza. But the fear is Hamas would perpetuate an even worse attack against Israel in the months or years to come. And that's a risk that Israelis and the Israeli government has not been willing to take. And so there's the question of how much of Hamas has been defeated. Netanyahu has said the goal is Hamas has to be completely eradicated. He's argued about 50% of Hamas fighters have been defeated. Hamas has said that's not true. And so there's a question about where are things at, right now, almost 6 months since all of this began. Others argue that Hamas is an ideology, that this can't be defeated. And others even argue that the ideology is growing stronger, not weaker, since October 7th, that achieving the goal of defeating Hamas is not even possible, that Hamas is relatively weak militarily, compared certainly to Hezbollah or certainly compared to state military powers. People might argue that had the Israeli military or security paid better attention, the October 7th attacks could have been avoided, or the death toll might have been less. That has been a critique within Israel, that Israelis have levied against their own government. But our position at Churches for Middle East Peace is that regardless of your perspective, a comprehensive ceasefire is in the best interest of all parties. The cessation of hostilities not only saves lives in Gaza, but that it will protect Israelis as well. Chuck Schumer's argument, Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah, should not be ignored. At Churches for Middle East Peace, we hope that peace would be pursued because of the moral argument that every human life should be valued, but there are pragmatic arguments to be made as well. And history has shown that violence begets violence, and a lasting, long-standing, comprehensive ceasefire is in the best interest of all.